Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Talking Music, the show where you get to enjoy long-form discussions with superb and fascinating musicians. My brilliant guest today is the Irish flamenco guitarist, John Walsh. John, welcome to Talking Music.
Well, thanks very much, Samuel, for having me. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure's all mine, my friend. Now, John, I think it's fair to say that most people following this channel may already be familiar with you and your work. But for those who aren't, could you please start by giving us just a brief overview of who you are and what's been your journey in life that has led you to be sitting here today?
Well, as you said, I'm a flamenco guitarist from Ireland, and I've been doing this for, let me see, 14 years now in total. I didn't study music originally. I studied physics, applied physics in university, and worked a bit in that after graduating. This is the very short answer, the very short version of the answer. I was playing a lot of guitar at the time, mostly rock music. Got into classical guitar a little bit, became kind of obsessed with Bach. More or less was playing Bach exclusively on nothing else for a while, and discovered flamenco by chance, really, but just happened to buy a CD in a CD shop, and just became obsessed really with it. And a number of years later, then quit my job, went to Spain and studied over there. Came home, and yeah, I've been doing this ever since. That's the easy version.
And I've got to ask you, what initially grabbed you about flamenco?
I've been asked this a few times, and I do find this particularly difficult to answer, because one aspect of it is easy to answer, in that at the time I was very obsessed with guitar playing and discovering new types of playing, but I was kind of very much into technical things and technical players. The sort of structure of Bach's music really attracted me. The fact that there was multiple lines being played on guitar, that really, really interested me. So when I heard flamenco the first time, I think the technical elements were obvious. I mean, it was a kind of, I didn't understand what was going on, but I had heard so much technical guitar music at that stage that doesn't really explain. It explained why I enjoyed listening to it initially, but there's some other sort of more difficult to describe element. It was really just an emotional level. I felt it was the first music really that kind of deeply affected me emotionally. Not exclusively, other pieces had, but the sort of entire sound of it, it just really appealed to me. And I just said, like, I have to learn this music. Basically, I have to learn how to do this. The sound is just amazing. And so I kind of resolved to learn it. That was it. I just promised myself I'm going to learn it, but I didn't have any idea how to go about it at the time. So I kind of said, like, maybe in 4 years, 5 years, or 6 years, or whenever I'll start learning it. And that's more or less what I did. It was about 5 years later that I actually started trying to learn it. But yeah, it was, I think it's more sort of an indescribable emotional element of it that, and that's kind of still what attracts me to it. It's the sort of the possibility, the creative possibilities within it as well. I've just found really, really attractive.
That's really interesting. And may I also ask, I suppose most people know you for your solo playing, but you also do accompany.
Mm-hmm.
Was it solo playing that initially drew you to flamenco, or was the cante and the baile also in the mix?
No, it was definitely solo. I mean, I think it's kind of like most guitarists that, you know, from outside of Spain that discover it first. Not all, but like most people hear the guitar first. the first time I heard the Cante was okay, I should say the CD was Fuente y Caudal by Paco Lucia, the CD I bought. Um, I had to learn more about this guy at the time, whoever he was. So I came across a CD of Cameron, which was an anthology CD. It wasn't really one. It wasn't one of the releases from the 70s with Paco. It was an anthology of Soleá and nothing else, just Soleá from all the different records. And that was the very first time I heard it. So it was a pretty good introduction to Cante. And I just thought, this is even better. You know, the two together is just fantastic. So I had listened, to be fair, I had listened a number of months to the CD already, and I had heard other bits, but no, it was originally guitar, but when I heard it, it wasn't in like, it only complemented it for me. I just thought it's just fantastic. But at the time, similar to the guitar, I had absolutely no idea. I couldn't understand why anything was happening, how it was happening. I couldn't understand the structure. Maybe that element of mystery was attractive as well, if I can remember correctly. It probably was for me attractive, that sort of not knowing how any of this stuff is happening and needing to figure it out.
It sounds very much like it chose you rather than you chose it in that respect.
It's funny. It's funny. I said that on my I think either my website or on my CD cover. I do feel that way because it's not the easiest thing to not the easiest thing to do, to be a flamenco guitarist abroad, you know, abroad from Spain. I mean, so yeah, it's like I kind of do feel an element of that. I feel it was always there, and I sort of stumbled in its path rather than the other way around.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Now, you've talked a lot about albums that have influenced you there. So I wanted to start by offering you a little bit of a compliment here. I've recently been listening to your debut album, Il Andalusia, and I absolutely love this album. It's really original, it's really fresh, it's beautifully put together. I'd highly recommend our watchers and listeners go and check it out. What I particularly loved about the album, John, is every track on there, though it's deeply rooted in the flamenco tradition, it also embraces musical influences that I presume are connected with your Irish heritage. In other words, I suppose what I'm trying to say is this: you have a very distinctive touch, feel and sound on the guitar that's instantly recognisable as you. How did that come into be? I mean, is that something you've consciously worked on, or is it something that developed naturally?
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the compliment, for starters. I'm delighted you enjoy it. I think I've kind of come to the conclusion over the years that, we form from childhood, from wherever, a sort of a lexicon, a musical language in our heads, similar to normal spoken language. And I think, that's in there. And the only thing I tried to do, which I always wanted to do, but was kind of given permission to do almost by my mentor, Salvador Andrade, over in Algeciras. He said to me one time, basically, that it's just so important to speak with your own voice, to not speak with the voice of someone else. And I felt that sort of gave me permission to bring the ideas which are already there and the influences which are already there in the music I've heard since I was young. And that music, I should say, is not just, say, traditional Irish music or anything like that, but anything that has influenced me, be it jazz or rock music or anything at all. I feel it just, that forms the whole, whatever it is. All those influences form the whole inside a person, and you speak with that voice whether you like it or not. That is your voice. So now there are elements of it, like at the same time, that are consciously done a certain way. So the title track, for example, was born in a kind of an unusual way. If I can tell you a little bit about how it is.
Please do.
I don't know if I've said to this about to anyone really publicly, at least, how this was born. So basically I was asked to do a bit of recording for a very well-known guy here called Bill Whelan. He is the creator of Riverdance, a very, very amazing big dancing and music show. And he was just incorporating small elements and new parts into it for the new season. And there was a flamenco part in it with cante, and before that then was like a traditional jig rhythms with bowron, a percussion instrument, and it was kind of like an idea to get from here to there, to get from point A to point B. So I kind of made little small ideas of doing that, from getting out to be. The funny thing was, point B was easier for me. The flamenco side was easier because that's what I work with. So I was just thinking, okay, well, let's use some kind of typical traditional phrasing, Irish music phrasing, in a jig form, and sort of distort it gradually until it becomes this other thing. It was very short, and it wasn't directly what went onto the album or anything like that. But the idea of it from there kind of it amused me a lot, to be honest. I had several different ideas that we were going to record, and one we recorded in the end. But the idea of it gave me a laugh at the time. That's the truth. It sort of humored me to go from one to the other. So I spent a long time then kind of forming that track. Starting in now it's like it's never fully Irish in one way. It sort of dips in and out the whole way, but gradually becomes more and more flamenco, I guess, as you go in, and then kind of goes back at the end. So some of the tracks are like that, in that there's some intentional elements in it, but a lot of it, to be honest, is like I said, just my own musical voice, and I've come to accept it. And I think that's really important, because I think maybe when you get into a music like flamenco, that's so specific, that has such a specific language, such a specific history, you can become afraid of your own voice, afraid to use your own language for fear of stepping outside norms, I guess. But I felt like I was given permission to do so. So that gave me a little bit of confidence, and I try to, as I say, speak with my own voice, so to speak, all the time, if possible.
I think that's a really interesting way of putting it, because essentially it's a little bit of both by the sounds of it. It's essentially, it was already there in you, but you consciously chose to bring it out.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
Yeah, pretty much, actually. Yeah, that's a succinct way of putting it, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. Well, you've touched on so many interesting things there, and it brings me to a question I really wanted to unpack with you. I think you'll be able to relate to what I'm about to say. I often find when I speak to music enthusiasts, there's often a perception that flamenco is an art form that can only be authentically expressed by people who've grown up in Spain. But here's the thing. I would argue that the presence of artists like yourself rather suggests that this perception isn't necessarily grounded in the objective modern reality of flamenco. To a certain extent, I would say, certainly in the past 20 years, flamenco has evolved to become a global art form. And what I mean by that is there are now practitioners across the globe who perform it with authenticity and conviction, irrespective of their cultural heritage. But this is a big subject, so let's get your perspective on it. What do you think on this?
It's definitely a big subject for sure. I mean, I agree with you. It's a global art form now. You could say, like, you could say someone that is born into a flamenco family in Spain has obvious advantage from the beginning, because the big part of it really, and I think you'll understand what I'm saying, or any musician will understand what I'm saying, for any particular genre, if you want to put it that way, it's familiarity, having it in your ear, hearing it so often that you don't think of it in some sort of academic way, that you know what to expect when it comes. So I think having that familiarity certainly helps. So I started guitar very late, comparatively speaking. I started when I was like 17 or 18. I never picked up the guitar before that. And it was years after that before I touched flamenco at all. It would have been easier if I had been doing it since I was 6, for sure. But I just decided that I was going to work 3 times as hard to get where I wanted to go. It's a funny one. There is one thing I think that's important. If you're going to get into a music like flamenco, and if you decide that you're going to play flamenco versus some music that's inspired by flamenco, which is fine, and nothing wrong with that. But if you want to compose flamenco music, or if you want to play flamenco music or accompany singers or dancers, it's extremely important, like that, you try to gain that familiarity as much as possible as well. That you learn the traditional language, that you learn all the things that are normal to say. I mean, say, musically speaking, because that's the shared language. That's the thing you're going to have in common with other artists that come from Spain or wherever else. Everybody understands the same language. So I think, for anybody that's getting into it, or that's starting their journey, or any stage in their journey, just to kind of bear that in mind, like, as much familiarity as possible, and that means as much listening as possible. So listening. And if you have the opportunity, hang out with flamencos. Go to parties where there are flamenco people and play with them as much as possible. And don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. Just play and learn, because that's the reality over there. You play and you learn, you soak it in by hearing, by seeing. So I would say, like, you have to bear that in mind first before you can accept it, that yes, it's a global art form, but it has rules, as you know, it has norms, it has rhythms and forms, which in a sense are extremely rigid in one aspect. And if you're going to play a particular palo, for example, there's language inside that you need to know. There's rhythms and norms inside that you need to know. Now, if you go that far and you're familiar with it, and you understand the traditional language, you understand what comes where, what is expected of you in this position or in that position, if you're accompanying, or whatever else, then there's no reason then why you can't authentically, like you say, express yourself as a flamenco artist. None at all. You will have to work hard, obviously, but it's fun work. So
I agree with pretty much everything you said there, and I also like the way you framed that, because you're right. In order to become a master, you have to embrace the role of a novice. You can't have the one without the other. And you're absolutely right. You will go into many situations where you will make a fool of yourself, but you will learn from it. And
yeah,
and those are very valuable experiences.
they're extremely valuable experience. I've had many. Many of them. So yeah, it's there's a fear element there. I mean, there's no point denying it. There's a fear element. You can feel very often like an intruder coming in from outside. That's not to say anybody makes you feel that way. I think a lot of it is internal to the person,
Yes.
it's just your own thing. You think, this is music for people from there, and I'm trying to do it, but no, I found, if like I said, if you learn the language, I'm not speaking about just Spanish, but you can learn that too. But if you learn the musical language of flamenco, really, really learn it, really make an effort, and become very familiar with listening to all things you can possibly get your hands on. I'm not just talking about guitar, I'm talking about everything. Listen to cante from as much as you can, from different eras as well, because the styles and stuff have changed and the roles have changed slightly. Uh, Watch dancers. All of this is at the disposal of people now with the internet. It's not the same as seeing it live, truth be told, obviously, but it's still there. There's so much at your disposal. You have to commit. If you really love it, you have to kind of commit and just do those things. And if you do those things, there's nothing really stopping you. Nothing at all.
I think our viewers and listeners will be really pleased to hear you talk about that, John. And I'd like to ask a little follow-up relating to that, if I may. How did you find your experiences out in Spain shaped the way you played? Because you'd obviously been learning prior to going out there. What was that experience like for you? Because we all have our own stories related to that. I'd like to hear yours.
I have so many stories relating to it. Like overall, just first of all, the experience. I just talk about the experience rather than the specifics. Overall, the experience is amazing. I have so many amazing memories from there. I was in so many places. I was mostly based in Algeciras, but yeah, I just so many amazing experiences. Very many humbling experiences, especially when you arrive first. Uh, how it shaped how I play. I mean, there's the kind of the straightforward, obvious part of it is that the teachers I had there and the people I was hanging around with, they obviously influenced me a lot in how I play. But you hear so much more flamenco. It's so much more accessible. You see how the interactions between the different members happen. It just changes. It changes how you approach things. Specifically, when I arrived there, my perception of the word or the meaning of the word slow was way off. I remember I went there. I had a lot of technique, so to speak, when I went there. And the first thing I was asked to do was just like play some thumb. And he said, play it slowly. So I played what I thought was slowly. And he said, no, slowly. And no matter how slow I went, it was no, slowly. So extremely slowly and really working on minutiae. And then a sort of very, very, I won't say obsessive, but like very, very high emphasis on rhythm. High emphasis on rhythm. That was the real thing that changed in my playing. Not just playing rhythm as in rascadas or whatever, but just internal rhythm of everything. And my kind of perception of things changed when I came home from that. I worked a lot more on improving my rhythm. And by the way, that is something everybody can do. People are obviously going to be born with innate qualities. Some people are going to naturally have better rhythm or perception of tempo, however that works in the brain, but some people just do and some people have less so. But you can improve it by working on it, you know, and paying attention to it. And I think that was probably one of the biggest things that happened to me, that I just focused from then on really on rhythm, on subdivisions, on overall rhythm, on phrasing. There were other technical elements, but I think they're less interesting in a sense than the rhythmic aspect. And finally, then I think probably I'm not going to say in any shape or form like I play in an Algeciras way, because there's a very particular kind of way of playing there, especially now. But if I play like anywhere, it's going to be more like there than it is Jerez or Cádiz or anywhere. It's going to be more like Algeciras, which is nice.
I like that. And by the way, I know exactly what you mean about the emphasis on rhythm, because that was the big takeaway I had from my time in Spain as well. And I'm sure most people who've had that experience as well can relate to exactly what you're talking about there. We touched on education when we were having that discussion. So I'd like to pivot towards that subject a bit more. Because in addition to being a really great flamenco player, you're also a very passionate teacher of flamenco. Now, naturally, most education in music is tailored to the specific needs of individual students. This being said, I find that most tutors tend to have, for want of a better phrase, an educational philosophy that kind of underpins much of what they do. Is this the case for you? And if so, what's yours?
Yes. Although it's probably, to be honest, it could be a philosophy of self-sabotage, because my main thing that I want to do with any student is to equip them with the tools that render the need for me irrelevant, basically. So to equip them in such a way that they no longer need a teacher. It doesn't seem to be working because they keep coming back. But that, I think, is probably my overall thing. Now, that's a very large subject. I'm being a bit facetious with it. It's a very large thing. I want students to understand what they're doing, to be able then, from that understanding, to analyze something themselves. Analyze may sound like a very cold way of putting it, but to break apart anything they're listening to, that they're learning, to take the kind of root principles of a technique and see how that would obviously then apply to another situation or another technique, to become sort of autodidacts, if you want to put it that way. Now, it's there's so much to learn that, like, it can go on for a long time, but that, I think, is my main thing. I like demystifying things as well. I don't really, because I want people to understand that, you know, this is music. It's like other musics. It's different from other musics in many respects, but at the end of the day, it's music. It has melody and harmony and rhythm. And how do those things work? How do they relate to each other? If students can kind of begin to understand that, not only does their learning curve get a bit steeper, but they go off and learn themselves almost. They come back with new ideas, or they've been transcribing material, or they're writing their own things. That I think if I was to have one kind of overriding thing, that would be it. That's aside from the more sub levels of, I have kind of particular approaches to learning things from a technical standpoint. But there, I think overall, over everything would be that, I think.
That's really interesting. And I'd like to ask a follow-up relating to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, most people who follow this channel are either flamenco guitarists or they have an interest in flamenco. And I'd like you to maybe speak directly to them on this one. Based on what you've just outlined of your educational philosophy, if you could offer aspiring flamenco guitarists just one piece of advice, and when I say advice, I mean a kind of overarching principle, a kind of compass that would point them north throughout much of their creative development, what would that piece of advice be?
Only one? Okay, I'll give it a go. I think listen. I know it seems like a simple answer, but there's so much in that. If you start unpacking it, it's a big thing. Really listen. Listen very closely. You could spend an entire day listening to a 30-second phrase if you really want to. I would, for example, I often get students to do this. Listen to a falsetto, and I normally choose the difficulty of the falsetto in this case actually doesn't matter. Okay, it can be super mega difficult or easy. It doesn't matter. Listen to the falsetto and then play something completely unrelated, either with one note, two notes, with your thumb, with rasgueado. It doesn't matter. It can be one chord, but with the rhythm of the notes in the falsetto. Okay? You have to follow the rhythm of the notes. No, you don't copy the notes. You don't copy the arpeggio. You only follow the rhythm of it. And now play that falsetto from start to finish just using that one chord or this one note. Or if you're adventurous, you can play whatever notes you like. And the process of doing that is deep listening. It's not just letting it go past you. You have to really, really listen. What's the relationship? What are the subdivisions here? How does that rhythm that's been played relate to the compass underneath? That's one example of what I mean by listening. How does the cante relate to the guitar? You can tell people and you can demonstrate, but you must listen to how it happens when guitars come in, what the role is. How are you going to, if you're not 100% sure of the letter that's been sung, you have a fair idea, but you're not sure, and a note is hit and it could be one chord or another, how are you going to know? You have to develop, and it only really comes through listening and experience. You have to build that kind of sound bank in your ear. So I think that'll be it. Listen, it seems like a simple thing, but there's a lot in there. If you can you listen to can you distinguish open strings from fretted notes if they're the same note, for example? That can help. That's very useful to know. That level of listening where you're really, really focusing, you could repeat the same thing over and over and over all day long. It's tiring. It's kind of work in a sense. But that would be my thing. Related to that as well is like, I'm not trying to cheat with two answers, by the way, but related to that is like, if you're listening to rhythm and you're really trying to internalize what you're listening to, really listen to those subdivisions, really get a sense of even quavers, even triplets, even semiquavers, quintuplets, or are they actually quintuplets or are they sextuplets with an extended first note? Really listen as closely as possible. You'll discover so much both about how you play yourself, if you listen to yourself by recording yourself, for example, and about whatever music you happen to learn or play in general, flamenco in this case, but any music, just listen, really listen, don't hear. There's a difference.
I think that's a wonderful piece of advice, and I entirely agree with you. I'd just like to tease a few things out in what you've just said there and riff on them a bit, because there's some great stuff. I mean, one thing that really strikes me in what you're saying is you're right, there's a very big difference between knowing something and internalizing it on a very deep level. And that exercise with the falsetto, that's a fantastic idea. You know, that's a really nice one. And the other one that's really struck me as well, because I know when I've taught people about the cante, one thing I find is that guitarists have quite a bad habit of only listening to the guitar. And I always say to them, you need to understand, you know, when you got the singer there, you don't have the guitar to listen to. So you need to know what they're doing and how that relates to what you have to do. So you need to listen to them and not rely on the guitar. So I know what you mean. You've really got to listen quite deeply to really get the most out of it.
Yeah, like one element of it to think about is like all music, really. The singer is king or queen, like every music. You know, rock music or blues music, whatever. If there's a singer, they're the boss. So people come to hear the singer. And they've got their role, and tasteful accompaniment in any style, you know, has its own little norms and things that you do. And I suppose your job in listening to the guitar, I guess, is beforehand. You know, that's really listening to know what to do, what's the normal response to say when a singer sings this, you know. But in practice of doing it, no, you have to listen out and listen as well. For example, this is maybe a little bit more difficult, but it's the same idea. If you are listening to a lot of cante, can you determine by the phrasing of the cante where that is in the compass, for example? Because there's a lot of those things that are normal as well. They go in certain places, they start in certain places, they finish. It's not 100% rule, because people take, artistic license all the time when they're singing, of course. But those type of things, if you're really, really closely listening, you begin to recognize them a bit more. It becomes a little bit less daunting.
Some wonderful, wonderful advice there, John. Thank you for that. I'm sure our listeners can get a lot out of it.
Thanks very much.
I'd now like to put a question to you that I like to ask all my guests, because it's a great way to get a better sense of their philosophy on music and how they see themselves as a musician. I think anybody who's ever picked up a musical instrument and tried to learn it at some point aspires to be a good musician. At least I hope they do. But I suppose to achieve something like that, you first have to define what you're trying to achieve. So let me ask you, John, what does it mean to you to be a good musician?
I mean, there's so many aspects of it. I think probably on top, though, is the I think at a basic level, the ability to express yourself. Now, that seems like a cop-out answer, but if what you're trying to express requires technical details, then to become that good musician, to express that, requires then the practice behind it and the technical practice behind it. If it's more simple music, how are you going to get simple music across? I say simple music, but less technical music, would say. It's not simple, but how are you going to get less technical music across in an impressive way to an audience? You have to express the thing correctly. It has to say something, transmitir, as they say. It has to get across to people. It has to say something to them, you know. That for me is probably the most important thing. I think in a more like a more objective, like simple, easy to define thing that I really like when playing with other musicians is just have good timing, just have good rhythm, please. That's the main thing, and we all need to work on that all the time, you know. But if you're playing with people that have great rhythm, and everything is so easy, everything is easy. So always work on that aspect. But yeah, I think, like, you know, when you're young and you listen to music, I mean, for most people, it's an emotional thing. It's you're not looking at it in as a kid with some sort of analytical hat on. It affects you somehow, and if it affects you, well, then that's what you have to remember. That's what you're trying to get across. It should say something, and I think it's important also to say that if your own music says something to you, very good. That's you don't need to please other people. I don't mean it like that, but you should try to be able to express your own, like I spoke about earlier, your own voice. That I think is the most important.
No, I think that's a good way of putting it. So, yeah, a good musician is someone who can express their inner world through their instrument. I like
Yeah.
that. That's a nice way of putting it.
Now, of course, that can, as you know, Samuel, that can take different forms. I mean, uh, if you want to, if your inner dialogue or the thing you want to get out is very technically difficult, well, then to become a good musician from an objective standpoint, then in that place requires you to spend a lot of time working on technique, to spend a lot of time working on efficiency of movement, on subdivisions and everything. So you have to it depends on the type of music you're playing and what is the type of music that you want to play. I think it has a massive bearing. But overall, I mean, if you go to see any musician, if they're playing three chords the whole night long, if they can get it across in a way that does something for you, you go out and say, "Wow, that was great, great musician." You know, for me, that's it anyway.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And as we've touched on quite a lot of this idea of kind of expressing your kind of world through music, I'd like to pivot now to an aspect of your musicianship that I've always really respected. Because I've been following your career now for a good 10 years, John, and you clearly love to compose your own original flamenco material. What is it about doing that so intrigues and interests you?
The process, yeah, is for me is the process. The end result is secondary, almost always. Once it's done, I if I have to play it in a concert, great. But it's the process of doing it. I love the process, the discovery, and the and that's definitely for me. That's it. I don't have as much time now, as I did back some years ago, but I remember and have been in recent weeks as well. The same, just spending so long, just sort of getting immersed, and you get sucked deeper into what you're doing. 90% of the ideas go in the bin. 90% and where they don't say anything to you at the end of it, but the process of getting there was still fun, even if it does go in the bin. That for me is the loveliest thing. And specifically within flamenco, I think I mean, in a really simple level, the sound of it, I just love the sound of it. I love the fact that I love dissonant music in general, I should say, okay? I know I love Bach and everything, but I do like I remember I'm going to just go on a little tangent here. I remember a good few years ago, many years ago, pre-flamenco days, myself and my friend friend from university, went to see a great classical guitarist play in Limerick. Um, and it was our first ever classical guitar concert. We had only started to play like a little bit of classical guitar. And he played a very normal program. I knew every piece he had played because I had listened to them on various CDs. There was some Bach and some typical Spanish Italian and stuff like this. And at the end was a piece, the Usher Waltz, the Koshkin piece. Now, looking back on it retrospectively, it's not that dissonant. It's fine. It sounds normal, to be honest, now to me. But at the time, for the language I had built up in my head at that stage of my life, it was so out there and so dissonant that I couldn't stop laughing during the concert. And I was holding my mouth and my friend was laughing. We weren't laughing at the person. We didn't do it out loud, but it was a struggle. We were young. It was just, what is this? You know, this is hilarious that this is in this world, in this music. I never heard anything like it. So I I get amused in a sense by sort of unexpected dissonances now and again. And I'm not talking about like atonal music or anything like that. But the fact that within flamenco there's a sort of a native dissonance makes life easy. So, there's a dissonance there. There's a license to make it even more dissonant if you want. And there's a license to be as sugary sweet as you want. So there's a lot within it that's allowable. And on the flip side of that, I think when I started writing, the absolute, what seemed to be, certainly at the time, the absolute rigidity of the forms kept me in a sort of a box where my ideas wouldn't fall out of it. So it was like a container, and inside the container, then you could do what you want. But the boundaries of the container were the best help ever, because they said, here are your principal beats. Here are like normally your chords change on this beat and that beat. And it was like already prepackaged ideas. And then fitting your own voice within that, then it's just fun. So I think that's still the same for me now, really. I haven't really changed a lot in that aspect. I enjoy playing or kind of taking things, normal, traditional pieces and phrases, and saying to myself, what would happen if you did, instead of doing that there, if you put that here, how would that affect everything else? Or how would it affect if you tried intentionally to make this part of the Soleil not sound like that? I try to make it sound, a different way, a different rhythm, and just having fun, I suppose, within it. And that's the thing I like about writing, for sure. Is the process and all of that kind of fun you have, and you discover things, and it's really lovely, actually. You discover, melodies that are in there that you didn't know were in there until you start writing. Some days are more difficult. Some days you're sitting there and there's nothing happening, and then you're walking down the road another day and you have an idea. Get your phone, sing a little voice memo, and then when you get home, start doing that. So yeah, the process I enjoy the most. The outcome was like, if I'm happy with the piece, I'm happy to listen to it once. But it's definitely the process of doing it for me. It's just the fascinating thing about it. And at the end of it, it's interesting. It's easy to forget that you've now created something on planet Earth that literally was not there before, and that nobody else was going to do that. That's very fascinating as well. And that's not to say that what you did is better, worse, or anything from anybody else. But without someone else having had your experiences and all the things you've gone through and everything in life, and positives and negatives, they couldn't have written that. And the same way I can't write something that someone else has. So it's a sort of, I don't know, it's interesting. You have a process that's fun, and at the end you can say, okay, well, that piece of music never existed before and now it exists. And yeah, that's my thing. It's for me, as you can probably tell, I get most animated about this side of things. I do love writing and composing ideas and that sort of thing.
I think what's really interesting about the answer you've just given is it flies in the face of what a lot of people think the compositional process is. Because I think what a lot of, if you said to most people in the general public, how does composition work? Most of them would probably kind of present a very kind of Hollywoodized version of it. They'd assume that you see a beautiful sunset out the window, and there it is, Beethoven's Fifth, all perfect and ready to go. And of course, it's not like that. It's more like writing an essay, and you edit it and you refine it, and this doesn't work, and you switch things around, and it's actually a very engaging creative process of slowly whittling it down and trying different things out, and being willing to not only have the intention to do a particular thing, but sometimes accepting this thing's come into my head and I wasn't expecting that to happen. Let's run with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm delighted that you went into such detail there, because a lot of people don't realize that's how composition is. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that.
There's one thing that not related to music, but it was comment I heard from an author, an extremely famous author that everybody will probably have heard of nowadays, George R. Martin, the chap that wrote all the Song of Ice and Fire, what Game of Thrones is based on. And of course, he's being asked all the time why his writing process is slow, essentially. And he described himself, he said, there's, as far as he's concerned, there's two types of writers. Architects who pre-plan the structure from start to finish, and gardeners who basically go out into their imagination garden, start pulling some weeds, start planting some flowers, and don't really know where they're going to, and what the garden's going to look like at the end. They just go with it. And that side of things is for me, I think that's more me, for sure. You what you said as well about like the Hollywoodized version is it's 100% true. What can happen is you can have an idea that's fully formed. That's fantastic. The idea is 10 seconds long, 15 seconds long. Now what? So like, how do you elaborate on that? How do you elaborate on a 10-second thing without repeating yourself over and over? You're not writing a pop song with a repeating chorus constantly and one verse with that has the same melody. There's nothing wrong with that either. But if you're speaking about composing in the way that flamenco is done, more or less, not these days, that's not the norm. So you need more material, and your 15-second flash of inspiration is brilliant, but then what? So you have to sort of work outwards from there.
I really like that. And this leads me on to a question that if I don't ask it, I'll never forgive myself, and I doubt my viewers would forgive me. I often hear students of flamenco say something similar to this. I'd love to compose my own material in flamenco, whether it's a falsetto or a whole piece, but I just don't know where to begin. What would you say to someone who says that?
I think, and I don't want to frustrate any listeners by giving the same answer as a previous question, but I would start by listening. Now, I have a slightly little different angle to this. If someone asked you, I would like to write a sonnet, but I've never written a sonnet before. And you say, okay, how many sonnets have you read? I've never read a sonnet. Okay, do you know the typical structure of a sonnet? No. Okay, well, we'll start there. Let's find out what a sonnet is. And then we'll work on the structure of it and the internal stuff and what makes it a sonnet. And then write a simple one. It doesn't have to be amazing, but something, your own sonnet you can write. But it's the same within a music like flamenco. You listen, and the more you listen and the more of other people's material that you learn, and that's super important. We can't get away from that. You have to learn other people's material. I mean, all the time. It's from doing that you um, that you're able to, that your fingers, I suppose, and the connection between your fingers and your head are able to sort of like make sense of what you're hearing now in your ear. How does that relate on the fingers? So that if you have an idea, you're more easily able to adapt it. I would say, like, okay, if you wanted to take a simple thing, so let's say you want to compose a falsetto for whatever, for a soleá or something, for example, one falsetto. Okay, well, what falsettos for soleá do you already know? I would start there, okay? Take two falsettos that are different from each other and start with a simple thing. Start with take the exact falsetto as it is, syncopate some of the ideas, change the notes, keep the notes the same, change the rhythm, keep the rhythm the same, change all the notes. Work from what's already there, and you're working with a template, so to speak, at the beginning. And the first thing you write is probably not going to be amazing. That's not the point. But the writing process is just like the playing process. Everybody, I think, would take for granted if you said, I want to become really good at playing guitar, whatever genre. The obvious thing you need to do is you need to spend a lot of time playing guitar. So if you want to become good at writing, or satisfactory, like good for yourself, spend time doing it, okay? And there's a number of ways, like I said, adapt things that already exist, or just take inspiration from things that already exist. But at the same time, I would say, like, if you're doing that for soleá, for example, just make sure you understand a little bit about soleá. You know, don't go blind into it, because you can write something beautiful. You might write something beautiful and it might function in some other form or some non-related music or whatever. But soleá means a certain thing, and the rhythms of it mean a certain thing. And there's kind of places where the chord changes go, which you can change intentionally, but don't go changing them intentionally if you don't know where they should normally go. So yeah, there's nothing, honestly, there's nothing to stop. Don't let don't let fear of it stop you doing it. But like, relate it back to some other normal thing. If you're, like I said, if you're going to write a poem but you don't read poetry, it's kind of difficult. If you write a haiku but you don't know what it is. So, like, yeah, like, start with a falsetto you already know. Make a little variation at the end of it even, and then you can say, okay, well, this little phrase at the end is mine. You can even start there. A phrase that only goes from beat number 7 to beat number 10. Make your own thing. Okay, the majority of the falsetto is by person A, but this little part is mine. Then soon enough you'll change the rest of it anyway. And you'll have your whole single compass falsetto that's yours. So just try, but be like, be respectful of the fact that, like, there are norms within it, within this music, that if you stick by, you kind of have a nice template to work on. It's not as daunting as it seems. It's a lot of fun. That's the main thing.
It's very, very good advice. And I like how you reference listening within that, because you joked at the start, you hope it's not a cop-out. It certainly wasn't. It was coming at it from a very different frame of reference, and a very good one. And one thing I would like to add into the mix as well, just kind of riffing on what you were saying, I think a lot of people sometimes lose sight of the fact that a lot of the great artists they admire didn't create what they did in a vacuum.
100%.
They developed it by being part of the tradition, and in many cases learning the works and the ideas of their heroes, and in time the flower of their own creativity grew. And I really liked how that was a solid part of your answer there. On that subject, John, we've got to a part of the discussion I was really looking forward to because, well, you can always get to know interesting things about a musician through this. The old saying goes, you are what you eat. I often say that from a musical perspective, you kind of are what you listen to a certain extent. And that's kind of been underpinning a lot of our discussions today. So let me ask you, who are the guitarists that have most inspired you? And crucially, they don't all have to be flamenco players. Please feel free to cast your net as wide as you like.
Okay, so first, to make sure everybody is not too shocked, I'm gonna stay right on topic. First, I'm gonna say for sure, Paco de Lucia for me was his music, literally his music that made me quit my job and do this. But that was later in my life. Kurt Cobain, for starters. Kurt Cobain, when I was a kid and picked up the guitar first, that's what I wanted to play. That was amazing. That's what I want to do. What he's doing. You know, that's what I want to sound like that. So, like, I mean, that's the reason I started. Everything I was playing when I started off was Nirvana. Constant Nirvana and other grunge music. After that, I got into rock music, and I have to say, very, very big influence on the way I started to view music was Steve Vai, the electric guitarist. Very, very, very big influence. I at that time was listening to many kind of flashy guitarists, and each one more flashy than the next. And when I heard him, I mean, he's as flashy as it gets, obviously, but he was so creative. And to be honest, when I was listening to it, I remember I thought this guy has no fear. This guy just writes really authentically. What he just plays, there's nobody else would write that and play that except Steve Vai. Nobody. And still, he sounds like himself all these years later. So he's a very, very, very big influence, I have to admit. In my kind of formation of thinking about guitar music. Guitarist then, other than that, I mean, like the most kind of crucial one was my mentor over in Algeciras, Salvador Andrades, for sure. He influenced me so much, helped me so much, made me understand so much. I had so many amazing experiences with him, just as a person, as a friend, apart from that. So, like, overall, I got to see him work in the studio, got to see him like play live gigs, accompanied in dancers and singers in his academy and everything. So massive influence. His son, Jose Manuel Leon, is my favorite flamenco guitarist of this alive. I mean, of this era, with no hands down. He's amazing. His approach to music and rhythm, again, is just super unique, authentic, and just unique. It's just him. He doesn't sound like anyone else. And I guess then another very big, this person now, I think, would have had a very big impact on how I think musically on the guitar in a flamenco context, and it's Juan Manuel Cañizares. I think his approach is amazing. His diligence is amazing. His creativity, his sort of his craftiness when it comes to falsettos, the originality of it. They'd be my main guitarists for sure if I was to name them.
There's some very good choices there. I'd be curious. I'm going to throw another one at you relating to some of that, John. I'd be curious to know how you feel. You mentioned a few rock guitarists earlier, Kurt Cobain, Steve Vai. Would you say that's shaped the way you think about flamenco?
No, I don't think they specifically would have shaped how I write flamenco at this time. Not really, no. But what they did was they were absolutely integral to getting me here. I wouldn't have had any interest in learning violin pieces on the guitar, was it not for Steve Vai. Read in an interview that he did that one time, and I said, okay, I better do that. So, um, so that kind of got me into the kind of classical music, I suppose, loosely speaking. You could say Baroque music more specifically. That then got me into playing Baroque music on the guitar, and that kind of was more like I was more in that vein then when I discovered flamenco. So that's why I think he's super important. Bach, I think learning a lot of Bach had a big influence on. No, let's not going to make any kind of grandiose statement here about it's very difficult saying Bach influenced me. It's a dangerous thing to say, but in a very simple way. So when I was young, I view things differently now, but like when I was young, learning Bach first, it was all so new to me. I never heard his music before. Just for me, the simple thing of two simultaneous lines happening was just amazing. And all the different ways that you could hear two things happening at the same time, depending on how long you held each note. And I do that probably a lot in my music. I do try to, now it's not the same, you're not writing counterpoint, I understand that, but I do try to give the impression at times of lines that are ending while others are beginning, but that there's a point where both are happening. And tiny bits of counterpoint within arpeggios, contrary motion and things like this that are happening within arpeggios. For example, in arpeggios, the Irlanda Lucia title track has these like sort of lines that are moving. I think that influence never left me, because I listened to so much of that of Bach that I think I had no choice but to be sort of influenced by it. The other players then, of course, like the flamenco ones are obvious. They don't need explanation in a sense. You're directly influenced by the genre. But yeah, I think the playing of Bach made a big difference in my head of how I approach things.
Well, John, I have to say, we've really had an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on the show and having it with me.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great.
The pleasure's all mine. Before I ask my last question, John, if people have enjoyed listening to what you have to say and want to find out more about you and where you're playing next, where's the best place to go?
Everything is John Walsh Guitar. So johnwalshguitar.ie. I'm in Ireland. That's the website. And all the usual places, Facebook and Instagram, it's all John Walsh Guitar. So I'm kind of easy to find that way. My website is where I hold most things, but I'm starting to put up little things on Instagram now, which I wasn't really doing before very much. Some little mini series of flamenco phrases, useful flamenco phrases, I call it, of varying difficulty. Some of them are very simple, some of them are more difficult. They're just whatever idea comes into my head of a particular morning. Well, like this phrase is useful for people because we play it all the time, or maybe this phrase is useful because someone might like to incorporate it. So I threw them up on Instagram, so I'm on that a bit. And YouTube, of course, John Walsh. Everything is John Walsh Guitar, so pretty easy to find that way.
I'd like to close with a question I always like to finish with. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. Let's say you could go back in time and offer your younger self, the young musician John Walsh, just one piece of advice. What would it be?
Slow down, I think. But it's not a race. There's no rush. Because I think you feel maybe when you're when you're starting, you know, it's a rush. You have to learn. You're so excited about it, and you're trying so hard to emulate what you hear, and you end up like running when you should be walking, I think. And I have had in previous years to go back, you know, and fix things because of that. This is many years ago, but yeah, you end up having to kind of fix little habits and mistakes. That's more difficult to do. So I think slow down and just and remember why you're doing it. Just and say to yourself, always remember why you're doing it, because it's with the modern world we live in and the difficulties of being a professional musician, and it's very easy at times to get disillusioned, and the whole thing with CD sales non-existent, and so you know, all these aspects. Just remember why you got into it in the first place. So when I was young, just keep saying that to yourself. Remember the reason you're doing this, you know. That would be what I'd say.
Very wise words to end on. And with that, John Walsh, thank you for coming on the show and talking music.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure.